We're honored to be joined by this distinguished panelist whose work and lived experiences engage directly with these themes. Dr. Sara Brown is here, right, is a world-renowned expert on genocide studies whose research focuses on gender and mass violence. Her book, Gender and Genocide in Rwanda, Women as Rescuer and Perpetrator, challenges conventional narratives by examining the complex roles women played during the genocide. Her research highlights both participation in the genocide and acts of moral courage, offering a nuanced understanding of how gender intersects with extremist ideology. Dr. Favorite Iradukunda is an assistant professor at UMass Amherst, vice president of Bibuka USA, and a survivor of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. Dr. Iradukunda brings a critical perspective on post-genocide reality. Her work with Ibuka focuses on memory. Dr. Margee Ensign has served as a university president in 3 continents and is a widely recognized scholar with extensive research on Rwanda. Dr. Ensign focuses on post-genocide recovery, governance, and development. Her work analyzes how Rwanda has rebuilt state institutions, fostered stability, and pursued socio-economic transformation. Her book, Rwanda, History and was the first to document the early stages of rebuilding in Rwanda. So we're really truly honored to have you with us this afternoon. Thank you for your time, and thank you to you all as well for being here for this important occasion. So I will now begin our discussion with Dr. Iradukunda, but we have also received questions from students that will also bring into the conversation as we proceed. Dr. Iradukunda, I want to start with you. As a survivor of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi and also the vice president of Ibuka, which is an organization that was born out of the need to give survivor a voice here in the United States and also beyond. How do you believe that survivor narratives can be more effectively integrated in education systems and policy frameworks in ways that preserve historical truth and help prevent future atrocities?
Thank you, Sandrine. That's a big question. I have a lot of notes here, so please stop me. I know we have limited time. But I think the first step to integrating survivors' narrative into education systems and policy frameworks is for the survivors to tell their stories in the first place. So we have to have the stories told. We have to allow survivors to share their lived experiences and for our stories not only to be told, but to be honored and made accessible through writing and other forms of storytelling. We know that a considerable number of survivors here in the US and beyond have been sharing their stories through books, academic journals, podcasts, and other forms of storytelling. And I would like to commend their incredible courage in doing so. It's not easy. Another encouraging fact is that we are increasingly seeing a number of young survivors telling their stories or their family stories or trying to gather their family stories, which is good. So these narratives should be the primary source of education for organizations and individuals. We know that it's not common for academic spaces to focus on the numbers. We love numbers in academia, or books written by academic researchers. We love our researchers. But sometimes these researchers don't have the lived experience. Oftentimes they don't. While these remain important tools that we can use, they don't tell the full story. Survivors' narratives humanize the numbers. And it is extremely important to let survivors tell their own stories. There is more work to be done in terms of making sure that these narratives are widely available once they are published. It is encouraging that some libraries and bookstores in the US, in some parts of the US, they are increasing carrying survivors' books. They are reaching out to us, asking for books. And so we are encouraged, and we do encourage more libraries to partner with Ibuka, to partner with the writers themselves to make stories available. this partnership is important because it also helps in creating educational opportunities. Once a book is published, we get the writers to go to the library to tell their story. And so that part of humanizing the story is there. But we also know that despite the increase in the number of stories written, told by survivors, there are still many barriers, especially related to publishing. Many survivors find the writing publication process daunting. I am in academia, I find it daunting. And so this is why we are here at a university and seeking experienced writers willing to work with us to demystify the writing process. It's not as, but it has to be demystified. And so we are seeking those writers, but also to get some writing workshops for the survivor community, continuous mentorship, and ensuring that stories are told and shared widely. But even as we encourage survivors to write, let's remember that Rwanda is an oral tradition community. We love to tell stories. We tell them well. And so not everybody is going to write a book. Not everybody has to write a book. And so we have to keep thinking about sustainable way to memorialize survivors' oral stories without necessarily having it be in a book. We have members of our community. I have surviving members of my community who I know for sure they are not going to write a book, yet they carry most of the details of how we survived. And so it is important to make sure that these stories are collected. And it's actually really urgent because, as I said in my speech, a lot of our elder members are unfortunately aging and passing on early. The second part of the question, which again was a very complex question, is how do we integrate the narrative into education policy? I just talked about how we make sure that the stories are actually shared, they are made available. So first of all, I want to highlight the importance of policy in this area. As survivors, we are the keeper of our narratives, but it's important to have strong policies to protect our memory. We can tell our narratives, we can tell the stories, but without the policies to protect our memories, the stories won't be protected. In education, happy to report, there has been an interest from some schools, university, and a number of states and counties across the U.S. to collaborate with us in integrating survivors' narrative in their program. We even had someone reach out to ask us to develop an anti-genocide program for their school based on survivors' narrative. But the number of people reaching out to us is still very, very limited. And the level to which our lived experience are respected, especially in academic space, to be honest, it needs improvement. There is also more work to be done when it comes to policy to protect our memory, as I said, and allow our community to thrive. That being said, I would like to acknowledge the many counties, cities that have signed proclamation. We have a lot of states that are doing it, acknowledging and naming the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. Many of these states, cities have made April 7th a day of reflection. So thank you to the states that have done it. We truly don't need everyone's support in ensuring that your town, your city, your state follows suit. You are going to be our advocate in your town, your city, wherever you live here in this United States. And while we are here, and especially today, let me again emphasize that it is the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. There is no alternative. There is no synonym. There is no need to invent one. Let me just wanted to put that out there. Another way to advance policy protecting memory is to ensure that survivors are actually involved in shaping the policy. Oftentimes we get invited, we share our lived experience, but we are seldomly invited to shape policies. Yet our narrative are not just stories. It's lived experience that has taught us valuable lessons that can help shape policies to prevent atrocities. For example, we know what hate speech is. We really do. And we know its consequences. We can therefore help in informing the shaping policies, addressing hate policy, for example. So these are just a few of the ideas.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. That was very thorough. And just continuing with the thread of hate speech that you brought up, I want to turn to you, Dr. Brown. In your work on the genocide against the Tutsi, you examine how ordinary people, with a particular attention to women, became involved in the genocidal project, and you pay close attention to the gendered content of the anti-Tutsi propaganda. Drawing from that analysis in today's global context, what would you say are the most reliable early warning indicator that hate speech is evolving into organized genocidal ideology? And how can policymakers distinguish between protected speech and dangerous incitement before violence? Because we always hear about protected speech and that being used as an excuse. So if you can speak to that.
Also a challenging set of questions I want to acknowledge. At first, I just want to say it is my sad honor to be here with you. And as I was thinking about today and the significance of being at Kwibuka 32, I was thinking of Kwibuka 10, Kwibuka 20. But as I was thinking about it, I thought about the words of Holocaust survivor and author Elie Wiesel. And he said at one point, we must bear witness. For not only are we responsible for the memories of the dead, we are responsible for what we are doing with those memories. And so I send my gratitude to all of you for being here today and also for the invitation to participate. This is an important question. Identifying the gray areas of the line that divides hate speech and incitement to commit violence is essential in the American context and beyond. And it's a running challenge. Here in the United States, hate speech is protected speech. And the line between hate speech and incitement to violence is such that an extremist, be them a racist, an anti-Semite, or a holdover from the anti-Tutsi ideology that reigned in 1994 Rwanda, those extremists can spew horrific language, espouse conspiracy theories, and share dehumanizing hate rhetoric in public spaces, online, and even in government proceedings like a 6-hour-long city council meeting I recently attended, during which extremists cited anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and myths, and this is all considered protected speech. Here in the United States, it is the right of the hater to spew their hatred. The line that separates hate speech and incitement is messy. It's difficult to determine, often in the moment, and in all honesty, it is insufficient. Because hate speech rarely ends there, we know all too often hate speech leads to acts of hate, often violent, and we have not yet solved for that problem across the United States. Now, I am speaking from Georgetown University here in the United States and with a uniquely American lens. And I want to acknowledge this specific lens because the reality in the United States is not the same as in Rwanda or across European Union nations where there are safeguards against hate speech and they can take proactive measures ahead of what we can do here in the US. But here in the US, that doesn't mean that we stand by and we do nothing. One of the major risk factors reflected in the case of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, alongside political upheaval, threats to the regime, prior atrocities perpetrated against Tutsis without any accountability, and unrestrained executive authority, was the normalization of an exclusionary ideology and discrimination. Now, what do I mean by normalization? When we hear hate speech targeting a group, it is and should be jarring. It should cause us pause, and it is a moment for everyday citizens to stand up against it and say no. But when exclusionary ideologies and discriminatory practices targeting a group are normalized, they become everyday practice, and they do not cause pause, rejection, or action. This normalization is a key early indicator that a country or a region is at risk of descending into violence, and it is implemented through a variety of mechanisms, including dehumanizing language and hate speech. As a result, we must be on the watch. We have to watch for rhetoric and actions taken to exclude certain segments of a population, normalize discrimination and hatred of a group, and dehumanizing language, likening a group to animals, pestilence, demons, or other inhuman or subhuman categories that by virtue of no longer being considered human would not be afforded the rights assured to all human beings, including the right to life. So look for decrees, programming, imagery, print materials, social media content, edited footage. The importance of words and images as tools for mobilization cannot be overstated. This is not new. Here too, we must be mindful of the role of fear as a mobilizing agent. I found in my research that the most important mobilizing tool in Rwanda was fear. An alliance was formed between media, government, and local leaders and other key stakeholders that ensured that the population was subjected to image, print, and radio influences that invoked terror and anxiety. The propagation and manipulation of this fear took place in all levels of society and in every sphere of influence, from the military to the lay leadership, from the public to the private. And fear resulting from threat is a powerful mobilizing tool. And combined with the normalization of exclusionary ideologies and discrimination, it can lead to violence, even genocide.
Thank you so much. I want to turn to you, Dr. Ensign, and talk about reconstruction. So you have documented Rwanda's remarkable post-genocide reconstruction. Could you briefly reflect on the progress Rwanda has made in the last 3 decades, particularly in the areas of governance and social rebuilding? And that this is also a two-part. In the near view, what were the most critical policy and leadership decisions that made that progress possible?
Thank you for the questions. Whoops, am I on here? Thank you for those important questions. Thank you to my fellow panelists for your comments, and Minister, your profound comments will stay for all of it, with all of us forever. So thank you for sharing that. And what you've said to me is today is the day to speak the truth, isn't it? And we all have to leave here today a little more of an understanding of what happened, and also an understanding of how far Rwanda has come. I've had the privilege of documenting how Rwanda rebuilt since 1999, when I went to find a student who I had put on a plane from here in 1994, who was running a State Department program. He said, I have to go home. He said, you can't go home. The U.S. government is paying for you to be here. He said, my family is going to be killed. I must go home. So I put him on that plane, and I had to go back and find him. So in the late 90s, I had the great privilege of beginning to come to Rwanda, and I did find him. He had lived on Aventura and became very prominent, one of those early leaders in Nigeria. So there has been so much ignorance and skepticism and disinformation, not only about the genocide against the Tutsi, but where Rwanda is now. So I just ask you all to think, let's leave talking about the truth, right? So imagine your country looks like this. A country of 7 million, 1 million were killed, infrastructure was decimated, all the key sectors were destroyed. Agriculture, no food, no economy, no healthcare, no education, no justice system. Before the genocide, there were 758 judges alive and practicing after 224. Who was going to deal with those perpetrators? Social cohesion was destroyed. The perpetrators lived in the country. They were neighbors. They were on the hills with other people. Trust and hope was destroyed. So the progress is disputed. So let's look at data that no one can dispute. Life expectancy in 1994 was what? It's the age for many of the students in this room, 28. In 2024, what is life expectancy in Rwanda according to the World Bank? It is 68. No country has made progress that quickly. And I use life expectancy because people only live longer if they have access to healthcare, if they have food, if they have education. Incredible progress. GDP per capita was about 100. It is now 1,000, with a population that's doubled from 7 million to 15 million. So reflect on that. I talk a lot about maternal mortality because maternal mortality measures the number of women who die in childbirth or right after. Rwanda had one of the highest after the genocide at 1,116 per 100,000. Right now, it has the lowest in the region, 229. Nigeria, a big, wealthy country that I lived and worked in for 8 years, much more capable of handling things like this, is 993. Please reflect on this data. Gender parity in schools, universal healthcare, and gender parity through secondary school. Why is that important? All the data shows us when women are educated through secondary school, infant and child mortality decline, HIV prevalence declines, there's improvements in economic growth, and lo and behold, there's a reduction in corruption. So Rwanda has focused on these things, on gender equity. And as we've heard, Rwanda is the first country with a female majority in parliament. And when you ask the question, how did all this happen? Women had a great deal to do with it. The 2003 Constitution had a 30% gender quota for women in all elected government positions. It is now, as the end of last year, 63.8%. Worldwide, what's the percent? 27.5. The only other countries that come close are Costa Rica, Mexico, UAE, and several others. So how did this happen? It's tremendous progress in 32 years. There are many reasons. I'm just going to cite a few. The focus on gender equity being one of them. You heard a little bit about the Chacha. I happened to be in the country just as Gacaca was being discussed. And the Minister of Justice was being challenged by a very important international human rights lawyer. You must give a trial for each of the perpetrators. You can't have justice without it. And his comment was, send us the prosecutors, send us the judges. There's no one left. So Rwanda turned back to something called homegrown solutions. And I think this is really important because these concepts, these practices emerged from the society. Gacaca being one of them that you talked about so eloquently. It had been a practice to deal with much less serious conflicts, trials in the hills. As you said, 260,000 citizens were elected to be judges, and they were trained. It was called the largest experiment in public justice in modern history. It would have taken 200 years to have those trials if they'd gone through a traditional justice system. 1,958,000 cases were heard. It was the most comprehensive post-conflict justice program attempted in history. I went with my student to his Gacaca trial of his family who was wiped out. I will never forget sitting on a bench with a mayor who had killed many children. It was very hard for me to believe this was reconciliation, this was justice, until I asked him on the way home, how do you feel? How are you? And he said, I feel free. Justice was served. So it's the survivors that matter here and how this unfolded. The second thing, there are many homegrown solutions and they're just so innovative, and I hope you'll do a little research on them. The second one was the fact that in the early 2000s, Rwanda passed a decentralization policy. Big risk. Let's decentralize everything, right? When you've just gone through a genocide. But the then Minister of Local Administration, who I had the privilege to go around with, Minister Musoni, Proteus Musoni, said, we must understand how local people feel about things. And I believe this was an enormous part of the promise. So very quickly, another homegrown solution was Ubugehi, which was a community process where people came together in agriculture to plant crops together. It turned into a very different type of initiative where people came together to say, this is what we need, and this is the money that we need for it. The overarching concept was something called imihigo, And I believe Imihigo is a big part of the progress in Rwanda. Again, very locally based. It used to be a ritual where people came together to compete, and it became that at the national level, but in terms of performance, so that people's lives would improve. So from the very beginning, in a country that has experienced genocide, local people were saying, this is what we need, and we're going to hold you accountable, leaders who are elected, for achieving things. And so at all levels in society now, Imihigos, which are performance contracts, governance performance contracts, are signed. And I was at the very first one where it was televised on television. And the mayors came in and said, here's my Imihigo, here's what I was committed to accomplish in education and health and gender. And there was a stoplight, red, green, and yellow. If you were doing really well, you got a green. If you were only making a little progress, a yellow. If you weren't making progress, you got a red, and you got to make sure you had your job in the future. So it's the accountability issue that's so important here. And not too long ago, Rwanda introduced Accountability Day. I attended one. It's extraordinary to hear local people challenging their leaders. Why didn't you accomplish the goals that we agreed to? We definitely need an Accountability Day in the United States. So Imihigo, I believe, was an extraordinary part of this progress. So 32 years after the genocide against the Tutsi, Rwanda is making remarkable progress in education and gender and economic growth, in poverty reduction, justice, governance, local participation, and healthcare. Many challenges remain, of course, in agriculture and productivity, in income distribution. But based on the privileged time I have had in Rwanda, I can say that it's a country with extraordinary vision, with honest, capable, and transformational leaders, including these two women in front of me, Minister, Ambassador Mukatabana, focused on the future, developing new models of development, dealing with its history, and empowering hope. We can all learn a lot from the story of Rwanda. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ensign. And speaking about lessons, I wanted to turn to you, Dr. Brown. After the Holocaust, the promise was never again. After Rwanda, the world repeated that promise, yet many would say that never again has too often become time and again. Do you think the world has learned any lessons?
I'll be honest, this is a question that keeps me up at night. I am the very proud Jewish mother of a fourth generation Holocaust survivor. And so this is something that I am deeply concerned about. I'm forced to ask that question far too often. I'm also a recovering educator, similar to Ambassador Mukantabana. And so you are going to get from me an educator's answer. I really feel that many of the biggest lessons that we can learn are found in effective education. Here I have to give great credit to Rwanda. The education initiative that has taken place has swept that country, has cast a difficult, hard, and necessary lens on a very dark chapter in history, but it's also created an opportunity for the young people to learn, grow, and know their history. And I have to give credit there. Now, education is also the best form of advocacy that we have. And education is not just effective as a response to the hate ideology that undergirds a genocide, it also is part of the answer to proactive prevention. It's not a panacea. It's not a silver bullet. It doesn't fix everything, but it is an essential component, and I feel it's often overlooked. So alongside strong governance, accountability, and restorative practices if atrocities have occurred, and other necessary mechanisms,
We're honored to be joined by this distinguished panelist whose work and lived experiences engage directly with these themes. Dr. Sara Brown, here to my right, is a world-renowned expert on genocide studies whose research focuses on gender and mass violence. Her book, Gender and Genocide in Rwanda, Women as Rescuer and Perpetrator, challenges conventional narratives by examining the complex roles women played during the genocide. Her research highlights both participation in the genocide and acts of moral courage, offering an
educational content for K through 12 audiences. This is deliberate. We recognize that much of the genocide scholarship that's available, and this is to your point, I would very much appreciate it, it's for a university-facing audience, or it's very much in academic speak. But the young leaders who are sitting in our middle schools and high schools right now, they need to be learning this content. So I'm proud to share that our curricular content, lesson plans, more than a dozen lesson plans about the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, grounded in the human story of genocide, are the most downloaded resources on the California Collaborative for Holocaust and Genocide Education's website. We've also published a guide for educators on how to teach about genocide and lesson plans on the Guatemalan genocide. And we train teachers around the United States on how to teach this content in a middle and high school context. These resources are funded by grants and therefore free for anyone to access, and this matters too. We cannot hide the content behind paywalls. It must be accessible, affordable, and high quality. I'll also say this, sharing a best practice based on the work of the organization I'm very proud to work for, American Jewish Committee. We cannot wait. We must be proactive in our efforts to combat hate and fight it wherever we find it. We need to meet the moment wherever it arises, and right now that means addressing social media and AI platforms. This is where misinformation and disinformation campaigns and emerging vernacular, often disguised as euphemisms, is being used to propagate hate and distort or diminish history on a global level. And this is what I also appreciated what Dr. Iradukunda spoke of in her opening remarks. She's absolutely correct. I am not a social media expert, but even I do my small part. Bear with me. Helping to curate content for young learners who are gleaning their news from social media sources and far too often are exposed to violent ideologies disguised as news and information. So if we want to realize the oft-cited adage of never again, we must play a role in educating across society, but especially our young people. And we must meet learners in the spaces where they are congregating and curate content that they can access. And we cannot wait for another day or sometime in the future when our schedules free up, when we have more time, when we have the resources. It's time to take the lessons we've learned and implement them now.
Thank you. And we received a question from a student that I want to pose to the panelists, and if you can respond. And it says, what role can policymakers or young people, especially students, play today in preventing atrocities?
I have to brag because I actually have one of my students in the audience. I have a high school student here. I'm not going to point you out because I don't want to embarrass you. I have a high school student here from San Diego, California, who happened to be here doing a university tour at the same time that I was on this panel, and so I invited him to come. He is part of a program that we call Leaders for Tomorrow, and every month we do training on identity, advocacy, and at the end of this, each student is to do an advocacy project. His advocacy project is bringing, it's me, so sorry about that, but bringing someone to come and speak to his upper school about instances of genocide in modern history. It's the first time that I know of that his school is going to take this kind of measure. They're doing it at the end of April. He's the example. Well, he's the opportunity. When we train our young people to lead and we give them the runway and the resources so that they can realize their projects, they will do better than all of us combined. And so I think that's a very key component of it. And also creating policy initiatives where we are facilitating and distributing those resources to meet the young learners where they are. They're already leading in their own right. Sometimes we just have to get out of the way or give them a little boost.
That's a really good answer. The only thing I'll add is that every year, as an educator, I get a chance to see bright young mind. They're very brilliant. They are tech savvy. I'm with you. I'm not, social media experts. Most of them are really tech savvy, and they're not afraid to challenge the status quo. Mm-hmm. And so they have a lot of willpower that if we make sure that, and they make sure, like you said, they're informed. They can use that tech savviness, if that's a word. They can use that willpower to inform their peers, because learning starts there. When you learn something new, when you learn the truth, you share it with peer. Young people are doing that already, and making sure that, as we've seen in the US, we've seen younger generation challenge older generation in so many different ways. And so when that can be used, I think that will be really a powerful tool. So we do have a next generation leader in Ivuka, and I know that she's been working with young people to make sure that they are informed and they are ready to share what they know and inform others.
It's amazing. It's great.
So I believe we're living in a perilous moment where violence and hatred and division and discrimination is increasing rapidly daily. So I think we look into our own hearts to begin with and make sure we're not perpetuating that, but to also make sure we're not accepting it. And so I think as individuals, we have an enormous responsibility to play as educators. And I chair a committee looking at the use of AI in democracy. And all of us must get up to speed on how AI can be used for good, which of course it can, but the disinformation that can emerge so quickly from that. So I think we have individual responsibilities as well as worse structural lens in our systems.
Thank you. Thank you all for your insight, for sharing your research with us and sharing your stories. And thank you all for your attention.